Hello everyone, and this is Marcio Cardoso here with a political hot take video on how progressives can win elections. Let's see, we're doing this video on Sunday, August 12th, 2018. We're about past halfway through the 2018 primary election season for who's going to go into the new Congress starting next year. And this is a big year for a lot of us progressives because this is the first election cycle in which we have had groups such as Our Revolution, which was started up by Bernie Sanders, and Justice Democrats, the group started by TYT founder Cenk Uygur, and having these groups promote and finance a lot of progressives. This is kind of like our first real test drive of real progressivism since at least the 2016 elections, the presidential elections, in which Bernie made his historic run to try to win the Democratic nomination. And so far, we've had mixed results. The progressives have won a decent share of seats. I was hoping that if we could get around 500, 50%, that would be pretty good. And we've come up a little bit short of that. We're not quite winning half of our races yet. I think they just mentioned the other day that Justice Democrats who ran in the primaries 5 days ago, we had 13 of them run. I think 6 out of 13 won, so it's a little bit below 500, but that's not too bad. Again, I was expecting, around and hoping really for a 500 percentage. It's hard for progressives, true progressives, to win these primaries because the establishment still holds most of the cards in the Democratic Party, and they also have the edge in money, and that makes a big, big, big difference. So I'm going to, in this video, give you a list of things that I think progressives can do to try to close the gap, to try to improve upon that slightly below 500 percentage, and so we can gain a greater stranglehold on the Democratic Party and thus can really fix this country. So I have a little list here. The first thing I suggest, number one, is to always challenge incumbents in races, unless of course the incumbent is a solid, tried and true progressive. For instance, Congressman Raul I hope I'm getting this right, Gravia, probably got it wrong, but he is a congressman from Arizona. He's as solid as progressive as it gets. Pramila Jayapal as well. I'm butchering those names and I'm sorry. She's a congresswoman from Washington. Those two are solid progressive allies, so we don't need to primary them per se. But let's say, I don't know, what's that guy? Oh yeah, Joe Crowley. I don't know if you guys heard of him. Joe Crowley from New York. Yeah, you might have heard of him. If you're a progressive watching this video, you definitely heard of him. It's good to primary people like that. Maybe I hear this is a pretty good candidate named Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. Oh, this name I can get. Ocasio-Cortez. Ah, that's right. She challenged and she beat him. It's never easy to beat an incumbent. It's very hard, actually. But Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez proved about a month and a half ago that it is possible. Despite the fact that Crowley had the name recognition, the seniority, and the dollars, Ocasio-Cortez was able to win. And there was a myriad of factors that went into her favor. Some would say that the district that Crowley represents is becoming more and more diverse. It's majority-minority now. It wasn't the case when Crowley first entered. Now it is. And Ocasio-Cortez being a Latina, maybe that helped. Also being a woman in a year in which women are winning a lot of races, that could have helped. I'm not denying that. In fact, one of the things that progressives can do to win more elections, we'll get to diversity in a sec. So the point is, though, is you got to run against incumbents because you never know if you can beat them. And even if you don't, here's why it's important that I think you do. In all the House races this year, I noticed whenever there was a vacancy, or if the incumbent was a Republican, therefore the Democratic primary, there's no incumbent that's a Democrat. You typically have these Democratic primaries with 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe even 10 candidates. I think the number one thing to be able to put yourself out there and give yourself a chance to win as a progressive is name recognition. That's very, very important. Well, how do you get name recognition? Well, if you're going up against 10, 11 other people, it's hard because you're in a crowded field. But what if you're only going up against one other person? It's you and that one other person. Now you're in better shape. I think that's what helped Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. She was basically the only other candidate on the ballot for the Democratic primary other than Joe Crowley, and that helped. Now, it didn't help, say, someone like Cori Bush. Cori Bush was running for Congress seat in Missouri. She was going up against the incumbent William Lacey Clay. And Cori Bush, unfortunately, even though she's a solid progressive, she came up far short. Lacey Clay, just, he had the better organization, he had the money, and it sounds like he didn't take the primaries for granted like Joe Crowley did, so Clay wins. But what Cori Bush did was she planted a seed. People now see that name. And if I'm Cori Bush, I run 2 years from now, and 4 years from now, and 6 years from now. Even if you never beat William Lacey Clay, you keep running. Because eventually, William Lacey Clay is not going to be there forever. And if he retires, who now has the most name recognition in that potential race to succeed him? He'd be Cori Bush. And that's not to say Cori Bush couldn't beat William Lacey Clay in a few years or elections. If she keeps running against him, she'll build up her name recognition. And that's key. Name recognition is key. And I think you can more easily build up your name recognition if you're challenging just one person as opposed to a bunch of other people. So I think it's pivotal that we challenge as many incumbents as possible. For Christ's sakes, I'm from the Bay Area. I don't live too far away. I don't live in the district, but I don't live too far away from the district that's represented by Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi, we don't consider her that progressive, very much establishment. And she represents San Francisco, probably the most progressive city in America, or at least one of the top 2 or 3. Maybe someone could challenge her there. Hey, I'd consider it, but I don't live in that district. The district that I live in is represented by Barbara Lee. I consider Barbara Lee to be a solid progressive, so I'm good with my congresswoman. I think Barbara Lee does a very good job. I'm not going to ever want to challenge her because she's like Raul Gravia or Pramila Jayapal, except she has a much easier name to pronounce. And she's a solid progressive, so I'm content with Barbara Lee. But all those other incumbents, challenge them. That'll help. So that's one. The number 2 thing that you can do to help progressives win elections is to continue to promote diverse candidates. People of color, women. That helps. That makes a difference. And we're seeing it in a lot of these races, whether it be establishment or progressive. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won. Solid progressive. Also, Hispanic woman. We had Rashida Tlaib win a congressional seat in Michigan. A Muslim woman. She could be the first Muslim in Congress and likely will be. Her district's a solid Democrat. She won her primary, and now she's in position to win the general, and she would succeed the seat that was once occupied by former legendary, now probably more infamous, John Conyers. Again, diverse candidates. And that doesn't mean that just because you feel diverse candidates means you're going to win. Cori Bush ran. She unfortunately came up short. And by the way, it doesn't mean fielding a white guy is a bad thing. James Thompson won his primary in a congressional district in Kansas. He's a white guy, but he was a great candidate and he won. So I'm not saying it has to be women or minorities, but it doesn't hurt, especially when we look at a system that our governmental system totally undoes people of color, and it still keeps women back as well. We could use more representation of people of color and women. I think that's fair. Doesn't mean we have to say no more white guys. I'm just saying let's make the representation a little bit more fair, especially if you're in a district that has majority-minority population. I think that makes sense. And it doesn't mean it's foolproof that you're going to win. Cori Bush, African-American woman, ran, and she came up short. The guy who beat her, William Lacey Clay, is an African-American man, so Cori Bush, William Lacey Clay, they're both minority candidates. But bottom line is, it doesn't hurt to be the diverse party. Progressives, we claim to be the ones that are not racist, like the other party. We don't like the KKK. We don't think they're fine people. So I think we got to walk the talk. And there's a lot of people in the establishment that like to point progressives as just a bunch of angry Bernie bros. And of course, for those of you who don't know, a Bernie bros is considered a white man who's just angry at everything. And yeah, they want to raise taxes on the rich, but they're also kind of racist. That's not what progressives are. So let's walk the talk and prove it. Let's have diverse candidates. More. Number 3 on how progressives can win elections. Let's try to unite behind one candidate in the primaries. Let's have a progressive primary before the actual primary, if you will. So, especially when it comes to races in which there's a lot of different candidates. There were several elections that I noticed where it seemed like there might have been more than one progressive running in a seat. It doesn't mean there were several candidates in one race that were endorsed by Justice Democrats, but you had several candidates that were kind of endorsed. And these were some of them. These were smaller races, more down ballot races. But if you got multiple progressives vying for candidacy in the primary, what happens is they split the vote, and when you split the vote, you end up losing. I'll give you an example. This is not technically in the progressive realm, but this is the same thing. In the race that was won by Rashida Tlaib, she won a race in the Michigan congressional district. She was actually running in 2 elections. One election was to succeed the remainder of the term of John Conyers, an election which, if she had won, she would start serving in November, just through January. Then there was a separate election that Tlaib was running for, which was to become the congresswoman for the 2 years in the next term. The special election that allows you to be in charge for 2 months, Tlaib actually lost that to a woman named Brenda Jones. Why is that? Well, it's possible Brenda Jones, being an African-American woman, got support from a lot of African-American voters. And this district that Tlaib is ultimately going to be in charge of eventually is heavily populated with African-Americans. But when you had the actual election, which was held at the same time, very awkward, that would determine who would run for 2 years after those 2 months. Tlaib won it. Why was that? Well, Brenda Jones was one of 3 African-Americans in that race. She was the only African-American in the special election race, but one of 3 in the main race. What happened was, in all likelihood, the vote got split between her and 2 other African-American candidates, and that allowed Tlaib to prevail. So that's just an example. It's not tied to progressives, but it's a similar situation, in that if you have multiple progressives running in a primary, their vote could get split, and that could allow an establishment candidate to come to the top. That is not good. That's why, for the only the most important primary in the world, if Bernie Sanders runs for president in 2020, and I think he will, I really am praying that Elizabeth Warren does not. And I like Elizabeth Warren a lot. But if she runs and Bernie runs, they split the progressive vote. And now you allow an establishment figure like Joe Biden to come through. Conversely, if Bernie runs and Warren doesn't, or maybe Warren decides to run and Bernie doesn't, now we're in pretty good shape, because you're going to have a whole bunch of establishment people running, and they're going to split the vote up and not allow the progressive candidate to come through. So it's important that we unite behind one candidate in primaries. And how do you do that? That's not easy. I think groups like Our Revolution and Justice Democrats, they got to come out early, make an endorsement. Honestly, I think Our Revolution and Justice Democrats should merge and almost create Justice Revolution, or, Revolution-crat. I don't know. Whatever. Justice Revolution sounds pretty good, you have to admit. Do that. Unite. Pick the candidate who you think is the best person. And you almost have to find a way to get any other potential progressive candidates to say, hey, could you step aside? Or let them know, hey, we're going with this person, and sell it all the way through. And that's important. Which leads into my other thing. Number 4. Endorse and campaign earlier on. A big congressional race in Kansas. Not the one that was won by James Thompson, but another one. I think it was the 3rd district. We had a solid progressive running named Brett Welder. And he almost won, but he came up short to more of an establishment figure, I'd have to say, in a woman named Sharice Davids. Now, maybe Sharice Davids was able to win because she had history on her side. Here we go with diversity. She was not just a female, but she has the potential to be the first Native American female in Congress, I believe. Or maybe it's the first lesbian Native American in Congress. And she has an amazing story. But what happened with Brett Welder was he got some help. He got endorsements and appearances at some of his rallies right before the election from Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But I think that came too little too late. Even though a lot of voters, they don't make up their mind until the end, I think more make up their mind towards the beginning. There was a story that came out, I think it was several months before the election, a group known as Emily's List, which is a political action committee that promotes women, particularly pro-choice women. And they gave about $500,000 to Sharice Davids. And most polls and most people in that area basically said that's when her campaign started to take off. Brett Wilder was endorsed by the Justice Democrats around that time as well. But no disrespect to Cenk Uygur, who does a great job with TYT. Cenk Uygur doesn't carry the same clout among progressives and voters that Bernie Sanders does. So, and I understand that Emily List made their move for Sharice Davids before anybody really knew who Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was, but I think it would have been helpful if Bernie Sanders, who was already a fan of Brett Wilder, I think it would have helped if Bernie Sanders had endorsed Wilder earlier on and done a few rallies with him earlier on. I know Bernie's got a lot on his plate. He's a busy guy, and ultimately he has to serve his constituents, which right now are first and foremost the citizens of Vermont. But I think if he had found some time to make a few more rallies, I think that could have made the difference. Because Brett Wilder only lost to Sharice Davids by a handful, 1,000 votes, which is not a massive amount. And I think endorsing earlier on is going to help. Point number 5, and this kind of piggybacks off of it. Bernie could have endorsed and campaigned earlier on, but Bernie's one guy. He can only go to so many places. But we don't have just one person who's the face of the progressive movement anymore. I've been mentioning Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I've also mentioned Rashida Tlaib. Those two women, credible stories, diverse backgrounds. They still got to win their general election, but they're virtually assured to win it. They could do what Bernie's been doing. They can help campaign for other candidates. It's almost like a domino effect. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, after she won her election, helped campaign for Rashida Tlaib. Rashida Tlaib, after winning her election, I don't know if she campaigned, but I know she sent some volunteers to another campaign that's going to have their election coming up in about a week or so. If that candidate wins, let's keep it going. Again, Bernie can only go to so many places. Now that we know who Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is, and I think more and more Americans will get to know who Rashida Tlaib is, it's important that they go and campaign and endorse early on with all these other candidates. Keep the momentum running. Again, AOC, I'm lazy, I'll just call her AOC. AOC, first and foremost, has to serve the people of the Bronx, I believe. That's who she has to serve first and foremost. So campaigning across the country, I get it, that takes time away, and you don't want to do too much of that. But a little bit of that here and there, it helps, and to do it earlier on. And again, she just came into the fold as a national figure, so it's not on her. But maybe for the rest of these campaigns, she can endorse, get on the boat earlier on, and especially for 2020, because now we know who she is, and she can get on board earlier, and that can really, really, really help. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 of 8. So I only got 2 more. I'm almost there. The number 7 thing on... Oh, I'm sorry. Mistake. Number 6. 6 of 7 things. This is number 6 of 7. Number 6 on how progressives can win elections. Work with wealthy allies. Work with wealthy allies. Oh, I'm a traitor. I really work for the dark side. I am with the wealthy. I am a supporter of the... No, guys, relax. We all know that Bernie Sanders likes to rail against the millionaires and the billionaires. Take them out, right? But this might shock you. There are quite a few people of immense wealth, millionaires and even billionaires. Maybe not quite as many billionaires, but there are a few who like the message of Bernie Sanders. They like what he's doing, and some of them, I believe, endorsed him last time. Maybe some held back because they didn't really know him. They had connections with Hillary Clinton, whatnot. But now that Hillary Clinton's pretty much out of the Democratic spotlight, the Democratic Party spotlight, it's kind of opened up for some of these people, and you could tell they're more willing to maybe hitch on to what Bernie has to offer, especially in light of Trump becoming president and, destroying the country and making us Russian slaves by proxy anyways. Nevertheless, I think it's important that we work with these wealthy allies. And there's a handful out there. David Geffen, he's a billionaire, big-time Hollywood producer. Tom Steyer, venture capitalist out of California, has said many times that he is a big fan of what Bernie has to propose. And here's one that's maybe slightly more controversial. But Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, who has said many times that he also agrees with a lot of what Bernie Sanders has to say, and has gone on numerous speeches and made statements basically saying that he would like to see similar things. In fact, Zuckerberg the other day made a speech in which he said that this country should have a universal income, meaning everybody in this country should be given a certain amount of money per month. That's really socialist. I mean, that is socialist. By the way, I'm a progressive, but I don't consider myself a socialist. I don't even consider myself a democratic socialist. I consider myself a social democrat. I know some people will say, well, that's the same thing as democratic socialist. It's not. I won't get offended if you call me one, whatever, call me, but I consider myself a social democrat. I don't even know if you should give someone a universal wage. But the point is, that's pretty progressive. And so you got an ally there, I think, in Mark Zuckerberg, who's willing to do that, say something like that. And he's also said that Medicare for all is a good idea. Obviously, he's for increasing the minimum wage, obviously. And he's for canceling student debt and making college tuition free. He's mentioned those things. Those are, I think, the three main Bernie staples, the three main Bernie principles. Medicare for all, $15 an hour minimum wage, or increase your wages, and making public colleges tuition free, and those who've already gone to college find a way to get rid of their debt, which really suffocates a lot of people financially. I was lucky. I don't have student debt to pay off, but I also had to go to, basically community college and the cheapest school I could find. Still got a good education though, but I'm just saying, going to UCLA was never an option for me. The bottom line is, and I know I went off on a side tangent there, but my point is Mark Zuckerberg is clearly someone that I think we can maybe listen to. And yes, he's controversial because his company Facebook's done some pretty naughty things lately. But working with wealthy allies can matter. You see groups like Our Revolution, Justice Democrats, they endorse and they help finance candidates. Yes, they finance them. They are political action committees. We don't like super PACs. Well, until the Supreme Court changes the system and reverses Citizens United, which is not happening anytime soon, you are going to need lots and lots of money to help promote progressive candidates. You need lots and lots of money. And maybe once you have enough progressives in office, then we can change the Citizens United ruling. But in order to do that, you got to have the court on your side. In order to do that, you need to have enough senators to approve of a progressive president who's nominating a progressive Supreme Court justice. To get to that point, though, you got to get progressives in office. And to do that, you're going to have money. Because I've noticed in most of the races that progressives lost, we're losing these races and these primaries mainly because we're being outspent. It's not always the case. We won a couple of them. AOC won her race despite being outspent. But I think there was a couple of factors that helped. Joe Crowley was arrogant, being a white guy in a majority-minority district. Those are some things that they don't all line up that way. Most districts aren't going to line up that way. I think there's one district right now where there's a white guy currently in charge of a majority-minority district, and he's going up against a progressive woman of color, but he's not taking the progressive challenger lightly. He's doing all the things he needs to do that will likely allow him to get reelected. Crowley was very arrogant in that race. If he wasn't arrogant, it would have been a lot tougher for AOC to pull it off. It's just the bottom line. And that's because Crowley had a money advantage. This other guy I was talking about has a money advantage. We need more money. It's the bottom line. We need more money. And if you work well and connect with progressive allies who are billionaires and millionaires, and they truly believe in all the things that we believe in, and they happen to be rich, and interestingly enough, a lot of these wealthy millionaires and billionaires, they tend to be self-made. Tom Steyer, as I mentioned, he had a nice upbringing. He wasn't born poor. He was born upper middle class, but he wasn't as wealthy as he is now. Mark Zuckerberg, he was just a regular Joe until Facebook came along, until maybe he stole it from the Winklevoss twins or whatnot, who knows. But the point is, he's basically a self-made billionaire. So these guys came from humbler beginnings, and they understand what it's like in the struggle. Hey, if they want to help us out, let's work with them. Let's do a little bit of wealth distribution. Let's put some of that money, that Zuckerberg money, that Facebook money, into Justice Democrats, into Our Revolution. These PACs have made a difference. If it wasn't for Justice Democrats or Our Revolution, we wouldn't be having as many progressive victories. We're not even winning half. But that's because of Justice Democrats and Our Revolution. If Justice Democrats and Our Revolution didn't exist, we'd have even fewer victories. AOC probably doesn't exist. Justice Democrats endorsing her, ultimately, I think, was something that helped tip the scale. Because even though AOC didn't get much money, she got some money, in part it was money from Justice Democrats or messaging. People knew about AOC. Enough people knew about AOC in the Bronx because of messaging. And especially in other races where you have Justice Democrats candidates winning and our Revolution candidates winning. But Justice Democrats and our Revolution, if you look into their finances, they're raising a decent amount of money. But they ain't raising jack compared to some of these other PACs that support corporate Democrats. And don't even get me started with the money that Republicans have, thanks to groups like the Koch brothers. So we could use the finances, and if we're able to work with people who have wealth, who really do agree with us, and would help pass our agenda, let's work with them. It might go against our principles to a certain extent, but not really, because the ideas that we believe in, we're still going to want to implement them, because the money we're taking in is coming from wealthier individuals, but individuals who believe in what we have, or what we're trying to do, because they weren't always that wealthy. They came from humble backgrounds, and they remember where they came from. It's like they say, oh, remember where you come from. They do. And if they want to help, let's work with them. And here's my last point. Put money into winnable elections, or as I like to call it, a blitzkrieg scenario. I'm not a Nazi. I'm not a Nazi. I am a fan of the NFL, though. An interesting side note. When in the NFL, or in football in general, when you blitz the quarterback, anyone who doesn't know what a blitz is where you send a certain amount of defensive players in a tight area across the line of scrimmage, hoping that at least one of them can get through past the offensive line and sack and destroy the quarterback. That's what a blitz is. And the word blitz comes from the term blitzkrieg, which is what the Germans did during World War II. It was a ruthlessly and unfortunately effective strategy in which Hitler said, when World War II started, I'm going to send all of my German troops. I want to invade France. I'm not going to spread them out and just cross into France. I'm going to send them all into one little area. And the French are going to have to defend this one little area with hundreds of thousands of German troops coming through. Eventually, some are going to get through, and once some get through, it's now open season on to Paris. Just like in an NFL blitz, it's open season to the quarterback. I think this is something we need to do here. Put money, especially once we have our money from our wealthy friends maybe, we got to put money into winnable elections. The bottom line is, for a variety of different reasons, some elections are just going to be easier to win than others for progressives. Justice Democrats, our Revolution, other groups and whatnot, we got to identify the races that we think have the best chance of winning. And we've got to put money into that. You see, Emily's List, when they gave their $500,000 donation to Sharice Davids in the Congressional District of Kansas, that gave Sharice Davids a big boom, and it allowed her to defeat Brett Welder. We need to counter that. If Emily's List gives Sharice Davids a big amount, we need to counter the amount and give a big amount to Brett Welder. But maybe some other progressives need that money. But Brett Welder had a chance to win his race. There were some progressives who I think got money and funding from Justice Democrats where you looked at and you said, they probably don't have a chance of winning. This is going to sound mean, but Cori Bush, I think she got some funding for Justice Democrats. I know she was endorsed by them. But almost every prognostication said that she had no chance. Whereas almost every prognostication said that Brett Welder had a chance. He had a very good chance. There were certain polls that had Welder ahead. There weren't any polls that had Cori Bush ahead. I'm not saying for Justice Democrats to not endorse Cori Bush. You can endorse her and maybe give her a sentimental amount of money. But maybe up the ante for Brett Welder, because you know you could win the Brett Welder race. Put as many chips into that race. Because if you spread it out and make it nice and even, like I think kind of happened here, and I'm not saying Welder and Bush got the same amount of money from Justice Democrats. I believe Welder did get more, but not enough more. You try to spread things out, both Welder and Bush fall short. If you pour it into something where you have a chance, yeah, Bush might even lose by an even greater amount in her race, but now Welder maybe wins this race, and now you got one more progressive in there. And once you get one more progressive in there, as I pointed out in one of my earlier points, now Welder can campaign for other candidates in other races for the rest of this primary season and down in 2020. And that's how you start it. Brick by brick. Rome wasn't built in a day. We're not going to have progressive candidates winning every single election. We're not going to have 100% victory. But you got to do it brick by brick. And I think that blitzkrieg scenario of putting all your forces into a handful of races that you know you have a chance of winning gives you a better chance of winning some of those races, and thus allows you to lay the foundation for future election cycles. So there you have it. Those are my 7 points on how progressives can win elections. I'm sure there's more, and I'm sure people who are going to watch this video are going to think, nah, you're not right, or no, that's bogus, or how dare you align with the billionaires. But I think these are key things that we could do. We're sort of doing some of those things, but not quite. Some of them, yeah, we're kind of doing it, but we could do more of it. Others, particularly aligning with with wealthy allies, I think that could work for us. And there's other progressive pundits out there, if you check the videos, that agree with me. Like David Dole, the Rational National, who basically said something similar when it comes to working with people of wealth. But I think if we follow those 7 steps, I think we can win more races. And it may not work now for 2018 because this election cycle is kind of winding up, but maybe for 2020, and so on and so forth. Or we could just have Bernie win the 2020 election, become president, and I think that would go a long way towards having a big-time revolution. But we got to take into account there is a possibility he may not win the 2020 election because he may not even win the 2020 primary. And if he doesn't, and he ain't getting any younger, we got to think of another contingency plan and having other things going in motion. And I think these are some ways that could happen. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.